So this week we're talking about the hybrid work model. What is it, and are there winners and losers in this whole thing? With me this week, I'm very pleased to introduce you to Professor Gary Martin. Gary is the CEO of the Australian Institute of Management in Western Australia. Welcome, Gary. And I know you're a frequent commentator on all sorts of social and workplace issues, so I'm really interested to hear what you've got to share with us this week.
Hi, Robin. Thanks for asking me to be part of this series.
No problem. So the big question, the hybrid work model, winners and losers, coming right up. So Gary, we hear lots and lots of talk about the hybrid work model. What's really been the background to this? How's it come about, and are there winners and losers?
Yeah, Rob, I think the important thing about hybrid work styles or models now is that we have to take a step back to look at where they've come from. And it all started with something that you might call the Great Disruption. And the Great Disruption took place when suddenly, because of the pandemic, people were forced to work from home. Not everybody was forced to work from home. Some people had to actually stay on the front line as well. But many people were asked or directed to work from home. There was something that occurred as a result of that, and that was the Great Divide, where people, half the people, people that were at the front line didn't have that option. So we had the people that could work from home and those that couldn't. And then that was followed then by something, by both people working on the front line, but also working from home. That was called Great Burnout. So people were saying that because they couldn't draw the line between what they do at home and what they do at work, and it all started to blur, that led to burnout. It led to something called the Great Resignation. People are calling, or still talking about this Great Resignation. Some people are saying it's happened already. Other people are saying it's about to happen. But whatever you like to call it, people didn't throw in their jobs and do nothing. They were perhaps changing employers and so on as well. And we have seen some evidence of people changing their employment. And I think then people all of a sudden started to call people back into the office. And some people didn't want to go. And so that meant there was a bit of negotiating because of the tight employment market. There was something like, well, you know, what about you come to the office 3 days a week and you work at home 2 days, or anything like that. So that's where this hybrid model really became very popular. And I guess the important thing about that is that suddenly there was also something called this Great Convergence as well. And the Great Convergence was, you know, your work and your work, if you like, and your home life, again, even in a hybrid type model, became one of the same. So it was a bit hard to know when you were working or when you're not working, and even to the point that people started to do things like staycations. And the staycation, sorry, not a staycation, it's probably more than a staycation, it's a workation. So we've heard about staycation, you stay locally. Now there's things called workations where people could basically do their work from a remote location, perhaps going down south, up north, overseas, anywhere they wanted to, because they were used to working remotely, and they could have a holiday, if you like, at the same time as working. So the boundaries between really working remotely and having a life started to blur. And that's where it is at the moment, is that we have this hybrid model where people are doing both. They're working from home or working remotely. That could be anywhere in the world, as well as being in the office for particular periods of time.
So let's get your crystal ball out here for a moment, because the workforce seems to be a little bit divided. I mean, amongst people that I talk to, lots of them love working at home. They don't want to be dragged back to the office, and yet there are others who really desperate to get back to the office and have their colleagues around them and chat over the water cooler and so on. So what's the future going to look like? Are we going to see this huge downsizing of office space, or what's going to happen?
It's possible that just to say to people, you've got to come back to the office. At the moment, people are actually pushing back on that, even though there are calls from people who have an interest in people returning to, say, for example, to the CBD. People are still going to push back on it because for them, it's like suddenly travelling to work in a horse and cart instead of the train. It's a retrograde step for those that enjoy working from home, and they want the best of both worlds. So for those that want a hybrid style, it's certainly going to be here for some time, unless these negotiations, when you get a job, start to fall out of those sorts of discussions because the employment market changes. So at the moment, you can negotiate a lot more if the unemployment rate suddenly got a lot higher. Things can swing around pretty quickly as well, where employers say, well, you want the job, you come into the office. It's simple as that. So I think we're certainly at this point at the moment where hybrid's going to be around for some time.
And I know you've spoken about this in the past, the sort of inequity of it all. I mean, is there a danger in our workplaces that we'll be setting up this divide of people who'd love to be able to work from home, but they can't?
Yeah, I think with hybrid style, there's less problem with that because people do have a presence in the office. But if you look at the whole issue with working from home, and if you're doing more work from home than in the office, there's certainly out of mind, out of sight, out of sight, out of mind. It's the other way around. And that can impact promotions and things like that. But there's any number of issues. There's how do people manage from afar? We've not caught up with the idea yet in many workplaces that a hybrid model is more based on outcomes. Not the hours that you work. There are always going to be people that take advantage of the system when they're out of mind and out of sight, or out of sight and out of mind, whichever way you look at it. I think induction for new employees is particularly challenging unless you've got a big chunk of your time in the office. And for some people, they just can't work at home or in a remote situation for any number of reasons. And it might be that they don't have that level of self-directedness to be able to do that. So there are certainly some issues, but for those people who can do it and thrive on it, I think they're one step ahead, but the system still has to catch up a little bit. We've lost some of the things about the perception of working from home or working remotely used to be that you weren't doing too much and that you wanted an extra day. We've lost a lot of that. We've got other issues now. What happens if you're sick? Do you work from home and when you're sick? And that's where a lot of this is going. So there's a whole range of things that still need to be sorted, I think.
There is. You raise a very interesting point there about, out of sight and out of mind. And I think there's a big trust factor that we've got to address here. And I think a lot of businesses have just had to grab that and realize, you've got to trust your teams. Very interesting thing happened to me the other day. I was interviewing for a new role in our business, and the lady I was interviewing said, "What are your working hours?" And I thought, I'd never even thought about that for the last time.
No.
And I said, we don't really have any working hours. Your particular role requires you to do these things. If you want to do that at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm happy.
Yeah, that's the outcomes, not hours type issue. But see, some employers have caught up with that, and others actually haven't. And I think
are we actually going to start measuring output more than clocking in and how many hours did you spend at work?
Yeah, that's one of the most challenging discussions. I've heard another employer talk about required hours where you need to be around, if you're a full-time employer, between 10 and 2. But what you do outside of that, if you choose to work at night or early morning and do other things during those periods of time, then it works for them, as long as there's a mandatory period where you can join conferences and do those sorts of things. So we've got a lot of learning to do still with this. I think one of the big issues that people haven't come to grips with, and it's going to cause some problems down the line, is is simply the workplace health and safety issues, and how we ensure that if people are mobile and they're working from wherever a couple of days a week, how we as employers ensure those are safe environments. And, you know, if I'm working in my holiday house for 3 months and then coming back and doing more time back in the office, how do we guarantee that the holiday environment or the holiday home is a safe environment, for example? And I know that people are making some headway on doing inspections and checklists and all these sorts of things, but it is a big issue. When we first went to working from home, for example, everyone accepted that that was a safer proposition perhaps than being in the office. But now people are saying, well, you know, when you are working in these hybrid arrangements, when you're working outside of the office, where are you and what's safe? And people want this flexibility that working remotely means, as I said, anywhere. You could be on a workation, you could be overseas, but what obligations does an employer have to ensure that you're in a safe environment, and how do they check that? These are some of the sorts of issues that people have.
That's a really interesting question, and it raises in my mind, is it the employer's responsibility anymore?
Well, I think under new
a month ago, for example, I was working out of a motorhome.
Yes.
1,000 k's north of here.
So
that was my choice.
In our state, in Western Australia, there's some new workplace legislation which relates to safety. And there are severe penalties for employers who don't ensure a safe environment. And that's being transitioned now. So, we're transitioning to those requirements now. Hefty penalties for not ensuring a safe environment. Also, related to people's, not just their physical health, but their mental health. So I think, you know, there's a few questions we have to ask about remote working and what risks employers have in that regard as well. Because as I said, when we first started working at home or working from home en masse, then it was a different situation because people thought that was the safer option. Now, as we go back into the office and the pandemic starts to recede a little bit, there's those questions that need to be addressed. And, you know, if you force people to work from home and they're in this unsafe environment, say, for example, domestic violence, that's on the employer perhaps too.
No,
it's not straightforward.
It is
lots more work to be done.
Yeah, it raises some fascinating challenges for the future. So, Professor Gary Martin, thanks for joining me this week, and it's been a fascinating discussion. Maybe I can ask you to just glance at that crystal ball once more and say, what do you think is going to be the major shift in the future? I mean, we're never going back to how it was, I imagine.
No, I think we are going to embrace hybrid work environments. We're going to sort out some of these issues. But as unemployment rates increase, if they do in the near future, we'll see the negotiating power drop out of some of these things, and some people might find themselves back in the office, even though they prefer a hybrid type environment.
Well, interesting times ahead. And for those of you watching this discussion, maybe comment down below. What's your preference? Do you like work from home? Are you desperate to get back to working, you know, in the same office with your colleagues? I'd love to know. But Gary, thank you once again for joining us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.